Hello and welcome to API Security with a Pinch of Salt. My name is Chris Westfall. I head up product marketing here at Salt Security. And today I'm excited to be joined by two of our SEs. I've got Adam and Ron both joining us today. Say hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Chris.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you guys on today. We're gonna talk about using API gateways for API security. And we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of doing that. And I'm excited to have you both on the show because I know you were both talking to a lot of customers. A lot of them use API gateways. And so hopefully you can share some of your insights from that interaction. But I'd love to start off by first kind of level setting and talking about what is an API gateway, just so we're all kind of on the same page. And maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the features that they have as well. Adam, you want to start?
Sure. So an API gateway is really the central management point for all APIs inside a company. APIs first came about to be more of a central place to do some authentication and authorization for APIs, and then continually progressed into a development platform, if you will, to help create APIs more efficiently, reuse APIs for different applications. And I liken it to being almost like a load balancer, if you will, whereas all traffic comes in there and then gets dispersed through to multiple different microservice or application endpoints.
Yep, awesome. Ron, anything to add there? How are you seeing customers use API gateways?
Yeah, I think Adam gave a very good overview. I think maybe one more point: API gateways many times allow you to document your APIs and then create a baseline of what APIs you have in the system, and so it gives you an additional layer of visibility into what you have on top of what Adam described.
Yeah, I think the important point there is that it's really that central point for API management, right? So documentation is big. Things like reuse you mentioned, Adam, being able to create an API and use it in other applications throughout the organization is a big benefit. And then just monitoring general usage to look for everything from misuse of an API to even chargeback or bill back for the different app groups that are using APIs and services in the organization. So awesome. Big question that we get, because we're an API security company, is I have an API gateway already. Why do I need something like Salt Security? How do you guys respond to that when you hear that? I'm sure you bump into it often.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, Adam, do you want to take it?
No, I was going to say, Ron, you go.
Thanks. We don't replace API gateways. We complement the gateway. API gateways provide a set of very valuable features for the API developers, and that's not what Salt is doing. Salt is focused on the security side of APIs, and on the security side of APIs, API gateways are really lacking the necessary capabilities to really protect against the vulnerabilities that are out there today for APIs.
When we talk about vulnerabilities, I know we oftentimes talk about the OWASP API security top 10. We kind of key off of that. Maybe you can put the security in the context of the top 10 a little bit.
Yeah, of course. So so just to level set, the API security top 10 by OWASP is a list that's relevant or relatively new. It came into place at the end of 2019, and it's not replacing the traditional top 10 list for web applications. It is a new list that's focused on API security specifically, and that's because the threats or vulnerabilities that are existing within APIs are mostly unique and different than what you see with the normal top 10 list for web applications. So if we take as an example, maybe the top one, right? The number one item on the list is BOLA, Broken Object Level Authorization. What happens there, as an example, an attacker might authenticate with a a specific user ID, and then continue sending that same user ID in the cookie while sending a different user ID in the query parameter as an example. And by doing that, what they're trying to do is bypass the authorization mechanisms in the system and gain access to data from other users that they're not supposed to be able to access. An API gateway is not built to handle something like that. An API gateway gets a request. If the request is structured correctly, it will pass the request back to the backend, to the API server. And then the API server, when it gets it, if it doesn't have the right protections in place, it will just process it and return the response to the end user. A good API security solution would be able to help you protect against that. As an example, Salt is using big data to really understand the behavior of your APIs and what's normal for every API call. And when we look at that use case that I described, Salt is able to compare values of different fields and parameters across different pieces of your request and response. And when two parameters are supposed to have the same value, but we see a request with those two parameters with different values on them, we can then highlight that and help you block and take action. So this is how, an API security solution like Salt is different than an API gateway.
Well, I guess arguably, authorization could take care of that, right? If you had your authorization set up properly, you could, or even have configured the security rules properly, you could solve for that. Why can't I do that with a gateway? Why is that the case? I know you mentioned big data on the Salt side.
Yeah, I think that's key because what we see with that is, the gateway is more of a development platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to require a lot of forethought. You're going to have to anticipate where that vulnerability might exist, and have to create some type of a policy or a catch code in the system to do that. And that's one thing that we've seen be a weak point for a lot of security solutions is it's all about what you're anticipating from a vulnerability or a breach perspective. I have to anticipate what the risk is and then create a policy to catch or identify or block that risk. And so when you look at security from an API gateway perspective, it wasn't meant to deal with the risk side or the security side of APIs. And so it's all about just using the right tool for the right scenario, right? Use an API gateway for what it's meant for as that development platform, that centralized management of your API traffic, then use a security tool, right, to manage the security side of it and to apply the protections.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, I know a lot of API gateways do tout some security functionality, and a lot of those functions or those capabilities do make sense in something like an API gateway or a proxy. What are some of the things you commonly see in an API gateway that provide maybe some foundational or some secure API security?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Ron.
So some of the features that security features that API gateways provide are important, right? Not downplaying that at all, and we don't recommend that you stop using them in any way. It's as an example, they can give you a layer of authentication and authorization. They can do encryption. They can do rate limiting and a bunch of other things that are very important for the security of your APIs. But these are all things that are part of your API gateway as a solution, but not going to protect you when an attack is unique to your APIs, which is really what we see with attacks on APIs today. When you look at APIs for different companies, each API is completely unique, and therefore it's very hard to protect against unique attacks with generic solutions. And this is why you need a solution that really understands the behavior of your APIs and has the big data and machine learning to back it up.
Yeah. So, another question we often get is, if a customer goes with Salt and has Salt in their environment, do they need their API gateway anymore? How do you answer that, Adam?
Yeah, absolutely not, right? A company needs to have that centralized management feature, definitely from an authentication standpoint, managing access tokens, authorizing user activity. That's exactly what an API gateway should be doing and is there for. You'll be able to create a single authentication point and then have multiple APIs can be able to leverage that authorization. And so that's what a gateway is there for. On the security side, though, as we've said, that's not what it's there for. That's not what an API gateway was meant for. And we can see that because API attacks continue to happen, and they continue to happen on APIs that are published through a gateway.
Yeah.
If security was easy through a gateway, then those attacks will be able to be detected and prevented.
Awesome. So, I know we have a lot of customers, as I mentioned, that have API gateways or had API gateways before we engaged with them, and now they've added Salt to their security stack or their API stack. How does a solution like Salt work with an API gateway? How does it integrate, and how does it complement the security? Maybe we can dig into that a little bit more. Ron, you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. So the Salt solution needs a copy or a mirror of your API traffic to be able to protect your APIs. And to get that, we can integrate with your API gateway in various different ways, depending on the specific gateway in question. So it could be a policy or a type of an application that you install in your API gateway. Again, depending on the API gateway, we have the solution to integrate into it and get a copy or a mirror of the API traffic. And once we get that copy, we can start deploying the different modules of Salt. The first one would be discovery, which is something that we do automatically and continuously. So we don't need to get a Swagger file, Swagger definition from a customer to tell that customer what they have in the system. We base our discovery on the mirror of the traffic. And then after we do discovery, we can do our prevention and detection using big data to create a very granular baseline of what's normal in your environment, and then take that baseline and build on top of that, identifying anomalies and building attacker profiles. And then we can close the loop with your developers by using our remediation module and providing your developers with a full view of all of the different vulnerabilities and how they can fix them.
Awesome. You mentioned discovery, which is one of our core capabilities, and in order to have an API in your API gateway, you kind of have to know that it exists. So I know in some cases we have customers that are able to find either shadow APIs or zombie APIs they didn't know about, and this helps them to kind of wrap their arms around their API environment, make sure it's under management in their API gateway. So that's really important. Adam, anything to add?
Let me take a moment on that, because that's a big thing, right? So if you tie the security in with the gateway, your visibility is limited to what's published through the API gateway. And so, like you said, Chris, we've had many instances where we've detected nearly 50% of the APIs in use by the company are not published through the gateway. Maybe they're key applications, so obviously their more critical apps are, but they still have APIs that access sensitive data that are not developed or published through a gateway.
How common? Sorry to interject, but how common is it for us to discover APIs that customers didn't know about? I mean, what percentage of customers discover something new?
So far, it's been 100%.
Awesome.
So we've yet to come across the situation where, and they'll tell you in the beginning, nope, everything's in the gateway. Or we have very stringent documentation policies, and everything is documented through the gateway. And it doesn't take longer than half a day for us to determine that that's not the case. And so, having a separate solutions that isn't dependent upon just gateway traffic,
Yeah.
but that's dependent upon, the traffic holistically in the environment allows us to, be more accurate in exactly how many APIs a company has.
Yeah. One thing we didn't mention was blocking attackers. How we would use a gateway or work with a gateway in order to enforce security or enforce that prevention piece. Ron, do you want to talk a little bit about that? How we do that?
Yeah, for sure. So the SALT system has different integrations with API gateways or additional systems a customer might have in their environment that are enforcement points. It could be a WAF or a firewall or a proxy that a customer might have in place. And this is how we do enforcement. We allow customers to block or take action on an attacker. And those integrations are very easy to use, and any environment or any tool that you have out there, whether it's an API gateway or something else that exposes a webhook, we can connect to it and enforce and block attackers using that.
Awesome. So yeah, another reason to keep your API gateway, right, is to use it for not only for management, but now we can use it for enforcement as part of that security piece. So
right.
Are there specific API gateways that we work with or that you see commonly as you're working with customers? Adam, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we're very flexible, kind of like what Ron said there. We can integrate or we can deploy, with any API gateway that we see in the market. From a market, we obviously have big names like Kong, Apigee, MuleSoft, but we continue to integrate with, the cloud native AWS API gateway or the API management platform in Azure. But really, we're API gateway agnostic, if you will, for us to be able to receive traffic.
Yeah, awesome. Well, guys, any last thoughts? Anything you want to add as parting words about API gateways? What you've seen in customer environments? Words of wisdom.
Maybe one thing.
Spot a little bit here.
I'm sorry.
Ahead, I said I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. Sorry.
Yeah, I think one question I hear a lot is from customers who are, in the process of migration and developing new APIs. They're asking us to recommend a specific API gateway, and that's there's nothing that we can say about a specific gateway that puts it in front of others. They're pretty much at parity with one another as far as feature set. What we do tell our customers is, if you have a budget for an API project and you're considering what you want to do, and you want to get an API management solution or an API gateway as well as API security, maybe make a decision based on budget. Meaning, some of the API gateways out there are cheaper than others, and that would allow you some space in your budget for API security to get your bases covered.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I guess evaluate the gateways or evaluate your requirements for an API gateway. Have a look at the ones that are available and see which ones fit both your budget and your requirements, and definitely take the security piece seriously. Make sure that you've got that covered. Adam, any last thoughts? Any last words?
Well, I think Ron really covered it well there, but simply don't trust your API gateway. Don't assume that all APIs, right, that you're using are going through your gateway. Be sure, know your landscape.
Yeah, so another great reason to use the two solutions together is to be able to make sure that you've got everything going through this the gateway for management, and having the two work together for both identifying attackers and blocking attackers, I think is super important when it comes to security. Well, guys, thank you both very much for your insights. I appreciate you coming on and talking about API gateways and talking through this a little bit and sharing some of your experiences with customers. And we look forward to having you on again to talk more about API security.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right. See you.
Thanks, Chris.